In the year 1921, a quiet laboratory in Paris became the birthplace of a profound psychological illusion. The legendary perfumer Ernest Beaux stood before the fashion designer Coco Chanel. He presented a row of numbered glass laboratory vials. The sample labeled number 5 contained an unprecedented overdose of synthetic aldehydes. This specific chemical choice gave birth to the iconic Chanel number 5. What nobody knew at the time was this small glass vessel would trigger a global chain reaction. The inexpensive chemical blend completely restructured the rules of human attraction. Modern corporations took an ancient tool used for masking rotting flesh. They successfully transformed it into a multi-billion-dollar empire built on human vanity. This is the hidden history of perfumery. It is a story about power, control, body ownership, and global economics. To comprehend the scale of this modern deception, we must journey back into the terrifying reality of our past. For many centuries, the great cities of Europe existed in a state of absolute sensory horror. The modern concept of daily personal hygiene did not exist. The simple act of washing the human body was viewed with profound medical dread. Leading physicians across the continent argued that warm water was a lethal vector for disease. They believed that heat opened the skin pores. This opening allowed the deadly miasma of the plague to enter the vital organs. As a direct result of this medical dogma, public baths were systematically shut down. The ruling classes and common peasants alike chose absolute filth as a shield against death. European monarchs spent their entire lives avoiding contact with water. Their bodies slowly deteriorated under heavy layers of unwashed silk and stiff velvet fabrics. The physical consequences of this lifestyle were deeply horrifying. The skin of nobles became covered in thick crusts of accumulated sweat, grease, and dirt. They believed this layer protected them from pestilence. King Henri IV of France was famous for his terrifying body odor. His mistresses wrote letters complaining about his scent. They described it as a mixture of rotting meat and old stables. The situation worsened during the frequent outbreaks of the Black Death. Doctors did not understand bacteria or viruses. They believed in the miasma theory. They thought bad air caused the sickness. They believed that pleasant aromas could neutralize the deadly vapors. This belief created a massive demand for powerful masking agents. People carried bundles of dried herbs. They burned heavy resins in the streets. The fight against disease was a fight against bad smells. The Palace of Versailles was an architectural masterpiece. It housed over 10,000 people at its peak. This population included nobles, servants, and soldiers. However, the palace designers completely ignored the necessity of plumbing. There were no public toilets or running water systems. The residents had to use portable commodes. These commodes were often left unemptied for days. Servants routinely emptied the waste buckets out of the palace windows. The waste accumulated in the grand courtyards below. The courtiers themselves did not care. They relieved themselves in the quiet corners of the building. They walked behind the heavy velvet curtains in the Hall of Mirrors. They used the spaces behind the giant marble statues. The grand hallways were stained with human waste. The air inside the palace was a dense, suffocating fog of biological decay. The smell of unwashed bodies combined with the odor of open latrines. Humanity needed a desperate solution to survive this sensory nightmare. This desperate need birthed the early European perfume industry. The products were entirely functional. They were chemical weapons used to fight a sensory war. The perfumers did not use delicate floral extracts. They knew that roses and lilies were too weak to fight the stench of Versailles. They needed ingredients with massive molecular weight. They needed substances that could bond with fabric and skin for long periods. They found their answers in the darkest corners of animal biology. And no, I'm not making that up. The early mixtures relied on the most intense secretions of wild animals. These substances possessed incredible density and staying power. They formed the literal foundation of high society. The first critical ingredient was natural deer musk. This substance was harvested from the male musk deer of the Himalayas. Hunters traveled into the frozen mountains to kill the animals. They removed the internal scent pod from the lower abdomen. The raw paste inside the pod had a powerful fecal odor. It was completely intolerable in its concentrated form. But when dissolved in alcohol, it transformed into a warm, persistent aroma. It could overpower the smell of sweat and disease. The second ingredient was castoreum. This material came from the anal glands of the European beaver. Trappers collected these glands during the fur trade. The dark secretion had a heavy, leathery scent. It was used to give perfumes an industrial-strength longevity. The third pillar of the ancient trade was civet paste. This substance was scraped from the perineal glands of the African civet cat. The animals were captured and kept in small iron cages. The operators intentionally agitated the cats to increase the secretion. The raw paste smelled intensely of pure human excrement. Yet when blended with spices, it created a magnetic effect. Finally, the industry relied on ambergris. This rare material was found floating on the ocean waves. It was the direct result of a sperm whale's internal digestive injury. The whale swallowed sharp squid beaks that cut its stomach. The mammal secretes a thick wax to coat the wounds. The whale then vomited the mass into the sea. The sun and salt water aged the material over decades. It developed a rich, marine, and earthy aroma. European aristocrats coated themselves in these fermented animal products. They applied the thick pastes directly to their unwashed necks. They wore hollow metal jewelry called pomanders around their waists. These silver spheres were packed with animal musks and heavy spices. The goal was to create a personal wall of scent. When a king walked through a palace hallway, he left a dense trail of whale vomit and beaver secretions. This thick layer of scent was the only barrier against the reality of their own filth. The perfume industry thrived because it functioned as a medical and social shield. Without these animal notes, high society would have collapsed under the weight of its own odor. The search for these raw materials drove global trade routes and early colonial expansion. The 19th century brought a sudden disruption to this ancient industry. The rapid development of organic chemistry changed everything. Scientists working in laboratories began unlocking the secrets of molecular structures. They discovered that the complex sense of nature could be duplicated using industrial waste. Researchers learned to synthesize aromatic molecules from coal tar. Coal tar was a toxic byproduct of the gas lighting industry. This technological leap changed the economics of scent production forever. Prior to this revolution, perfume creation was a slow agricultural craft. Generations of artisans had spent their lives studying natural plants. They manually pressed millions of delicate rose petals to extract tiny drops of essential oil. The process required immense physical labor and botanical knowledge. The sudden arrival of cheap synthetic molecules instantly shattered this traditional ecosystem. Industrial factories could produce massive vats of artificial fragrance for a fraction of the cost. They synthesized vanillin, coumarin, and artificial nitro-musks using automated chemical processes. In 1868, a brilliant chemist named William Henry Perkins synthesized coumarin in a laboratory setting. This was the birth of synthetic perfumery. The natural molecule existed in tonka beans. The natural extraction was incredibly expensive. The synthetic version cost almost nothing to manufacture. Then came the bizarre story of Albert Baur. In 1888, Baur was an organic chemist working on military technology. He wanted to invent a new high explosive. He hoped to create a molecule more stable and powerful than dynamite. He experimented with various combinations of toluene and nitric acid. One evening, his experiment failed to produce an explosive reaction. He cleaned his laboratory equipment and walked home. As he walked, he noticed a strange phenomenon. His hands and clothing were emitting a powerful, sweet aroma. It was a dense, magnetic scent that closely resembled natural deer musk. He had accidentally invented the world's first synthetic nitro-musk. He realized the commercial potential immediately. He abandoned military research and patented the molecule under the name Musk Baur. It became an instant commercial sensation. The global perfume industry now had access to a cheap, mass-produced alternative to expensive animal musk. This development democratized the availability of scent. But it destroyed the traditional creators completely. The historic family-owned perfume houses of France found themselves unable to compete. The market was flooded with cheap industrial imitations that smelled identical to natural luxury. The capital of this art was the town of Grasse in southern France. The unique microclimate of the valley allowed for the cultivation of rare flowers. The local families had spent generations refining their extraction techniques. The most important technique was called enfleurage. Enfleurage was an incredibly labor-intensive process. Workers built large wooden frames holding glass chassis. They coated the glass sheets with a layer of purified animal fat. They harvested fresh jasmine and tuberose flowers by hand at dawn. They had to pick the flowers before the sun dried out the essential oils. The workers carefully placed the individual petals onto the fat. The fat absorbed the aromatic molecules over several days. The workers then removed the spent petals using small wooden tweezers. They replaced them with fresh petals. This cycle was repeated dozens of times until the fat was fully saturated with scent. The physical toll on the workers was immense. They spent 12 hours a day bending over the glass sheets. They suffered from chronic back pain and vision loss. The extraction rooms were damp and cold to prevent the fat from melting. The workers' hands were constantly exposed to harsh alcohol washes used to separate the oil from the fat. Their skin became cracked, bleeding, and permanently damaged. The corporate factories could mimic the scent of jasmine using cheap coal tar derivatives. The price of their natural oils plummeted in the global market. The traditional workshops could not cover their labor costs. The master artisans watched their fields rot. They lost their homes to foreclosure. Generations of specialized botanical knowledge disappeared within a decade. Many legendary master perfumers fell into deep depression and financial ruin. They lost their homes to corporate banks. They died in absolute poverty, isolated and forgotten. The craft of the human artisan was completely replaced by the industrial conveyor belt. The corporate chemical cartels took complete control of the scent market. The new chemical corporations faced a massive structural crisis in the early 20th century. This crisis arose from the sudden adoption of modern public sanitation systems. Municipal governments built comprehensive centralized sewer systems beneath major urban areas. The famous engineer Joseph Bazalgette designed the London sewage system. This engineering marvel removed millions of tons of waste from the city streets. Concurrently, municipal water networks brought clean, running tap water directly into private homes. The introduction of personal cleanliness changed human behavior completely. Mass-produced, affordable bar soap became a standard consumer item. The average citizen adopted the habit of bathing regularly. The unendurable biological stench that had defined human civilization for thousands of years disappeared. The streets were clean. The human body no longer smelled of living decay or open wounds. The primary historical purpose of perfume had disappeared. This profound sociological shift threatened to completely destroy the global fragrance market. The industry could no longer sell perfume as a necessary shield against environmental foulness. If the population was clean and odor-free, the practical need for heavy masking scents evaporated. The massive chemical factories faced the grim prospect of empty assembly lines and bankrupt balance sheets. The executives realized they could not rely on the old arguments of survival and medical protection. They needed a radical strategy to keep their products relevant to a modern, sanitized public. The industry had to completely reinvent the meaning of human scent. They turned away from the physical reality of hygiene and looked toward psychology. Pay attention to this next detail because it explains everything. The corporate directors realized they had to invent a psychological disease. They systematically decoupled perfume from basic hygiene. They attached it directly to the human ego, sexual validation, and social status. They hired pioneer advertisers to weaponize human shame against the masses. They convinced the public that their natural, clean biological scent was inherently offensive and socially dangerous. Through aggressive advertising, they transformed a simple industrial commodity into an essential emotional shield. Subscribe to the channel if you are starting to see through the grand illusions of our history. Now, let us examine how this corporate trap expanded into the modern era. The marketing executives hired consumer psychologists to design a new form of social anxiety. They targeted the rising middle class of the mid-20th century. The advertisements focused heavily on the fear of social isolation and professional failure. They created elaborate narratives around the concept of the invisible defect. One famous campaign featured a young, attractive woman sitting alone at a social gathering. The text of the advertisement suggested that her friends were secretly whispering about her natural body scent. It claimed that her natural biology was driving potential husbands away. Another campaign targeted ambitious young businessmen. The graphics showed a man being passed over for an executive promotion. The explanation provided by the advertisement was his failure to maintain a sophisticated scent profile. The corporate narrative successfully convinced the population that cleanliness was not enough. To be truly acceptable, a human being had to be completely odorless or coated in a commercial chemical film. Think about that for a second. The industry successfully turned the natural, clean human body into a source of deep personal shame. They transformed human pheromones into a social liability. This brilliant manipulation allowed the chemical giants to build a business model with unparalleled profit margins. They established a permanent consumer habit that required continuous financial investment. The physical product they offered was incredibly inexpensive to manufacture on an industrial scale. The financial architecture of the modern perfume industry is an exercise in absolute corporate cynicism. A consumer walks into a high-end luxury boutique in the year 2026. They select a beautifully crafted, heavy glass bottle bearing the name of a famous French fashion designer. They willingly pay $200 for this item. They believe they are purchasing a rare, precious elixir of luxury. The physical reality inside that bottle is completely different. Approximately 95% of the entire volume consists of denatured industrial alcohol and distilled water. The remaining 5% is a mixture of synthetic aroma molecules produced in massive chemical reactors. The actual manufacturing cost of the fluid inside the bottle is measured in mere cents. The packaging, the glass production, and the metal cap cost significantly more than the fragrance itself. The vast majority of the consumer's money goes directly to fund multi-million-dollar television advertisements and celebrity endorsements. The consumer is not paying for a rare material or skilled craftsmanship. They are purchasing a heavily marketed concept of self-worth wrapped in an inexpensive glass package. The macroeconomic consequences of this shift extended far beyond the walls of the corporate boardroom. The insatiable demand for designer fragrances reshaped global trade and industrial production methods. The industry required millions of highly decorative glass vessels to justify its exorbitant retail pricing. This necessity led to the creation of massive manufacturing facilities dedicated solely to the production of single-use cosmetic packaging. These operations consumed vast amounts of energy and raw materials. They generated significant carbon footprints to produce items destined for the landfill. The packaging became a major contributor to global industrial waste streams. Furthermore, the global trade routes shifted to prioritize the rapid distribution of these high-margin chemical fluids. Pristine natural ecosystems were converted into monoculture plantations to source the remaining natural raw materials required for luxury branding. The ecological damage caused by synthetic fragrance chemicals became a silent environmental crisis. The massive volumes of perfume sprayed by millions of consumers daily did not simply disappear into the air. The chemical residues were regularly washed off the skin during bathing rituals. They entered the municipal wastewater treatment systems in massive quantities. Traditional water treatment facilities were never designed to filter out complex synthetic organic compounds. As a direct result, these stable molecules passed directly through the treatment plants. They entered the fragile ecosystems of the world's rivers, lakes, and oceans. Among the most damaging of these compounds were the stable polycyclic musks. These synthetic chemicals were engineered by corporate laboratories to resist degradation. They were designed to ensure that a perfume clung to a consumer's skin for a long time. These persistent synthetic musks accumulated rapidly in the tissues of aquatic organisms. Marine biologists began detecting high concentrations of these artificial compounds in wild fish populations and marine mammals. The chemicals acted as endocrine disruptors in wildlife, altering reproductive cycles and damaging biodiversity. entire aquatic food chains began showing signs of systemic chemical contamination. The pursuit of an artificial sense of cleanliness had resulted in the chemical pollution of the global hydrosphere. The scale of this environmental footprint stood in stark contrast to the clean, luxurious image projected by fragrance advertisements. The global community had traded the temporary stench of medieval streets for the permanent chemical degradation of the natural world. The corporate strategy also began to exert a powerful influence over modern urban architecture and commercial spaces. Real estate developers and retail corporations recognized the psychological power of ambient scenting. They realized they could use synthetic fragrances to manipulate consumer behavior inside physical environments. They integrated complex fragrance diffusion systems directly into the ventilation networks of modern shopping malls and luxury hotels. These systems pumped specific, proprietary scent blends into the public air to induce a state of relaxed compliance. The goal was to prolong the time consumers spent inside commercial spaces and increase impulse purchasing behavior. The very air of the modern city became a managed corporate product design to drive economic transactions. The individual could no longer escape the sensory manipulation of the fragrance industry, even in public spaces. The global trade networks developed a deep reliance on the high profit margins generated by the cosmetic sector. International luxury conglomerates acquired historic fashion houses specifically to exploit their perfume licenses. The fragrance division became the primary source of cash flow for the entire luxury goods industry. The haute couture clothing lines often operate at a financial loss. They exist primarily as high-end marketing tools to maintain the prestige of the brand. The true economic engine of the fashion empire was the continuous sale of cheap synthetic perfumes to the global middle class. The industry locked consumers into a perpetual cycle of buying and replacing these liquid illusions. The everyday consumer believed they were participating in a culture of high art. In reality, they were serving as the primary revenue source for global chemical syndicates. The corporate strategy did not stop at the retail counter. The fragrance industry expanded its influence directly into modern urban architecture and public spaces. Real estate developers and major retail corporations discovered the psychological power of ambient scenting. They realized they could use synthetic scents to manipulate human behavior on a massive scale. They integrated specialized fragrance diffusion systems directly into the primary HVAC ventilation networks of modern buildings. High-end shopping centers, luxury hotels, and international casinos use these systems as standard operational tools. The machines pump proprietary chemical blends into the public air supply 24 hours a day. These specific scents are carefully engineered by corporate consumer psychologists. They are designed to lower human stress levels, induce a state of relaxed compliance, and cloud rational decision-making. A consumer walking through a modern commercial space inhales these invisible chemical triggers. Their brain subconsciously associates the aroma with safety, luxury, and comfort. As a direct result, the consumer spends significantly more time inside the store. Their resistance to impulse buying drops dramatically. The very air of the modern city has been transformed into a corporate product designed to extract financial wealth. The individual can no longer escape the sensory manipulation of the industry, even in public spaces. The global financial networks developed a deep structural reliance on these high-profit margins. International luxury conglomerates such as LVMH and Kering acquired historic fashion houses specifically to seize control of their perfume licenses. The fragrance division became the ultimate economic engine for the entire global luxury market. The haute couture clothing lines and elaborate runway shows often operate at a massive financial loss. They exist primarily as high-prestige marketing tools to maintain the brand's aura of elite exclusivity. The true wealth of the fashion empire is generated by the continuous sale of cheap, synthetic liquid perfumes to the global middle class. The industry has locked humanity into a perpetual loop of buying and replacing these cheap chemical illusions. The everyday consumer believes they were participating in a culture of high art. In reality, they are serving as the primary source of revenue for global chemical syndicates. The history of the word perfume itself reveals this ancient connection. It comes from the Latin phrase perfumum. This phrase translates directly to through smoke. It links back to ancient religious sacrifices. People burned animals and plants to send pleasing aromas to the gods. They believed the gods would be angered by the natural smell of slaughter and decay. The Roman Empire possessed highly advanced sanitation. They built the Cloaca Maxima sewer system. They built massive public baths like the Baths of Caracalla. The citizens bathed daily. Scent was used for luxury, not for survival. When the empire fell, the Germanic tribes destroyed the aqueducts. The knowledge of sanitation was lost for 1,000 years. The early Christian church also discouraged public bathing. They viewed it as a pagan luxury that promoted sins of the flesh. They argued that spiritual purity was more important than physical cleanliness. This theological shift accelerated the descent into filth. The physical symptoms of the plagues made this worse. The bubonic plague caused massive, painful swellings called buboes in the groin and armpits. These swellings would eventually rupture, leaking black fluid and pus. The smell of a dying plague patient was incredibly distinct and terrifying. It was the physical scent of active internal decomposition. The living citizens were surrounded by these dying bodies. The fear of the smell drove people to extreme measures. They would rub their clothing with strong vinegar. They would carry sponges soaked in camphor inside their pockets. They believed the strong chemical odors could create an invisible force field against the airborne death. This iconic figure of the plague doctor was designed by Charles Delorme in 1619. The doctor wore a long leather coat coated in wax. They wore thick leather gloves and boots. The most striking element was the primitive gas mask. It was a large leather hood with a long, curved beak. The beak was not a decorative choice. It was a functional chemical container. The tip of the beak was packed with dried flowers, aromatic herbs, and spices. The doctors filled it with camphor, ambergris, myrrh, and rose petals. When the doctor breathed, the air passed through this thick layer of aromatics. They believed this filtration system neutralized the deadly miasma. The leather coat prevented the bad air from touching their skin pores. This uniform was a physical manifestation of the absolute terror of smell. The conditions of early modern London mirrored this reality. The population grew rapidly in the 17th century. The city infrastructure could not keep pace. People kept pigs and cows inside their small urban basements. The animal manure was piled in the narrow alleys. The human waste was collected in shallow cesspools beneath the floorboards. These cesspools frequently leaked into the local drinking wells. The water was contaminated with cholera and typhoid. The air was thick with the smoke of burning sea coal, mixed with the smell of rotting food and human excrement. This was the environment that birthed the modern demand for imported fragrance products. The shift occurred rapidly in the 1920s. This was the era of the birth of modern advertising. Edward Bernays published his seminal book titled Propaganda in 1928. He argued that human beings are driven by irrational, unconscious desires. He stated that successful businesses must tap into these desires to control consumer behavior. The cosmetic and fragrance industries were the first to implement his ideas on a massive scale. They stopped describing the ingredients of their products. They stopped talking about alcohol, chemicals, or flowers. Instead, they began selling dreams of transformation. The mid-century corporate consolidation accelerated this trend. The independent perfume houses were systematically bought out by industrial chemical conglomerates. Companies like Givaudan, Firmenich, and International Flavors and Fragrances became the invisible giants of the industry. They built massive research and development facilities. They employed teams of organic chemists to invent completely new, patented aroma molecules. These molecules did not exist in nature. They were completely artificial creations. The corporations patented these structures to establish absolute monopolies over specific scent profiles. The exact process of modern fragrance design reflects this corporate control. A luxury fashion brand decides to launch a new perfume. They do not hire a master artist to sit in a room with flower petals. Instead, the brand executives write a marketing brief. This brief describes the target consumer, the price point, and the psychological mood of the campaign. They send this brief to the chemical giants. The chemical corporations assign the project to a corporate perfumer, known in the industry as a nose. The nose sits in front of a computer screen. They use specialized software to select synthetic molecules from a digital catalog. They create a chemical formula designed to maximize consumer appeal in testing panels. The formula is then mixed by automated factory machinery in massive industrial vats. The fashion brand simply prints its luxury logo onto the cheap glass bottle. Environmental researchers have developed advanced testing methods. They can detect trace amounts of chemical pollutants in parts per trillion. Their studies have revealed that synthetic musks are now present in the world's most remote locations. They have detected galaxolide in the snow of the Arctic Circle. The molecules are carried through the atmosphere by global wind patterns. They fall with the rain into pristine ecosystems. The accumulation of these chemicals in the fat tissues of marine mammals disrupts their natural behavior. It damages their ability to navigate and hunt. The search for personal style has resulted in a permanent chemical footprint across the entire planet. The consumer remains completely unaware of this hidden connection. They buy the product to feel unique. They buy it to express their identity. But they are actually participating in a highly managed, mass-produced industrial system. The emotional connection they feel to the fragrance is the result of deliberate psychological design. Today, we routinely apply a few drops of luxury fragrance to our skin before stepping out into the world. We view this simple act as an expression of our unique personality and refined taste. Yet beneath the polished surface of the modern crystal bottle lies the enduring triumph of a cynical historical manipulation. Humanity successfully conquered the terrifying physical filth of the medieval era and the palaces of Versailles. But in doing so, we willingly became the disciplined servants of a massive chemical illusion. We spend our hard-earned wealth for the manufactured privilege of smelling exactly how corporate marketing directors dictate. The archivist slowly closes the heavy pages of his massive folio and removes his academic glasses. The ancient cycle of human concealment continues uninterrupted. If this history surprised you, subscribe to the archive now. Click the video on your screen to dive deeper into our hidden world.